Hey guys, it's me Nas, and I'm going to react to a video which is Best of Mania WrestleMania Greatest Moments, which is from Wrestle with Andy. And this is going to be, you know, one of the moments that people gonna remember for the next few years. Some could be like maybe just a few years, 1 to 2 years or something like that, but it's one of those moments where, you know, history has been made or some sort, or you could argue that there are some histories or moments that is going to become a part where a young kid once said, or maybe a grown adult would be like, you know what, I remember this moment because that wrestler was a reason that, it fills with childhood memories or moments that I would cherish forever as a fan of wrestling in general. But we're going to react to this video since WrestleMania is around the corner, and let's get into this video.
Ever since its inception in 1985, WrestleMania has been by far and away the biggest show in all of wrestling, the point where prior years' worth of storylines usually climax. Obviously then, this has meant there have been a lot of iconic moments and matches to take place there, moments and matches befitting the moniker of the granddaddy of them all. But what are the biggest and best of these? Well, that's exactly what we want to look at right now, starting with the most recent example, the time Cody Rhodes finished the story at WrestleMania 40. You all remember this one, we're sure. After all, it was only 1 year ago that the American Nightmare was able to create what will probably go down as the defining moment of this era of WWE when he beat Roman Reigns to become undisputed WWE Universal Champion. Why was this such a big moment? Well, because the build to it had been so long and eventful. Let's not forget that it was way back in the summer of 2020 that Roman Reigns first started his run on top when he won the Universal title from Bray Wyatt. And from that point onwards, he and the Bloodline would go on to absolutely dominate WWE TV for the next 4 years.
4 years.
Sure, occasionally there would be someone who looked like he might beat the Tribal Chief, but whenever a Drew McIntyre or a Sami Zayn got close, they ultimately failed. Hell, even
because the family is going to help Roman to win. That's basically how it is, and that's part of a heel move. But it's like sometimes it's kind of a bit tiring because I thought that Roman is going to be this unstoppable type of guy that can handle it on his own, but he just needed his family to help him, and that's how it is.
Even Cody himself would fall the first time when he tried to beat the champ at WrestleMania 39. Come the next year, though, there would be no such mistakes, as this time, with the help of not only Jey Uso, but John Cena, Seth Rollins, and The Undertaker too, the grandson of a plumber would finally pull off the impossible by toppling Roman.
And knowing that this moment is like the Avengers moment where you got the team of good versus, the evil empire. And it's one of those things that, one of the best WrestleMania moments, and you can't topple it. It's one of the best moments in this night alone, for sure.
Needless to say then, this was a cathartic moment for fans watching, and one of the greatest moments in this modern era. So big of a moment would it be, in fact, it would turn Cody into the undisputed face of the company, with him still holding on to that WWE title as of the time of this video's recording. And it would allow WWE to have their biggest gate in history at nearly $40 million, so by all metrics, it was a blowaway success. But it's not the only time a big babyface win at the Showcase of the Immortals has led to great things for WWE, as the exact same thing would happen decades prior in 1998 when Stone Cold Steve Austin won his first world title at WrestleMania 14. Yes, this one may be an even bigger deal than Cody finishing the story, as during the late 90s there was no one in the entire industry who was hotter than Steve Austin. Hell, even now, almost 30 years on, there's still never been anyone who's been quite that over. And the reason he was so over was because, as the great anti-hero of his time, the Rattlesnake was just about the coolest guy on the planet to fans watching. But then how could he not be when he was causing absolute mayhem on a weekly basis on Monday Night Raw, going after whoever he pleased, whenever he pleased, even if that person just so happened to be his boss, Vince McMahon. Honestly, it was impossible to not be behind this guy, even when he was supposed to be the heel. The only thing he'd yet to do by the time early 1998 came around, in fact, was win the WWF title. And that would all begin to change after he came out victorious in the Royal Rumble in January of that year. Yes, now Stone Cold had earned himself a shot at then-champion Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 14. And to make matters better, the special guest enforcer for that bout was going to be none other than Iron Mike Tyson, meaning a much larger audience than normal was going to be watching. Would Austin be able to take advantage of this? Yes, he would. And after dispatching of HBK, all with a little help from Tyson, of course, he'd go on to usher WWF into its second boom period, the period known as the Attitude Era. Really then, for historical significance alone, this one has to be included in today's video, as it's the point WWE fully got started with their most popular mainstream period ever. And it all happened because Steve Austin was able to win the title. But that wasn't the origin of Steve Austin as a big-time babyface. No, the origin of this would come 1 year prior when he faced up.
The thing is that, people like Austin because the character, but at the same time, most of the guys are, you can argue that most of, in the 90s, they don't want baby faces to overcome that much anymore. They just think that they want to side with the heels, and it's gonna be understandable. But, knowing that that event happened, let's not forget, because JR or Jim Ross at the time called the best lines, which is Austin era has just begun, after he, Stone Cold Steve Austin raised the title, and knowing that he celebrated during that time, it was really a good moment. But this is, before we're going to continue, yes, Austin versus Bret Hart, it happened last year. Well, this is basically how the double turn happened, and it's one of those things that's very rare in the wrestling world, where Stone Cold was the heel, Bret Hart was the babyface, and then after the match, it turned switch where Bret became the heel, and then Stone Cold became the babyface, which is crazy. But again, this is where it all began for Stone Cold's Steve Austin's career. It's not the way he won the championship. It's when he started that iconic picture where the blood poured down in his face, knowing that he was in the sharpshooter submission. That was one of the iconic moments.
Off against Bret Hart at WrestleMania 13 in an all-timer of a submission bout. Yes, let's rewind for a second and give a bit of a backstory. Back in late 1996 and early 1997, Bret Hart was still the biggest babyface WWF had.
Yeah.
And the reason for this was because he represented everything that was good and true about being a star athlete who fans could look up to. Meanwhile, on the flip side to this, there was Stone Cold Steve Austin, one of the company's top heels on account of his take-no-prisoners attitude and habit of screwing over everyone around him. But while this led to the pair having a great babyface versus heel bout at Survivor Series 1996, after that, something strange happened. Fans started switching their allegiances.
Yeah.
Why were they doing this? Well, because by that point, we were entering the era of South Park and Eminem, the era of the anti-hero. And so suddenly, the Hitman's babyface theatrics felt a little passé, and the Rattlesnake's behavior felt cool. And this would all play into the story of the pair's rematch at WrestleMania 13, as here, the idea was that Bret wanted to expose Austin for the charlatan that he was by making him submit right in the middle of the ring. Cut to the match then, and the atmosphere was electric, not just because of the story going in, but because of the quality of work on display here. And what put the bow on the whole thing was the ending where, after refusing to tap out to the sharpshooter and instead passing out as a result of blood loss, Austin would technically lose, but would be formally turned babyface in spite of this. As for Bret, well, he continued to beat down on his opponent after the bell had rung, making him the undeniable heel going forward. But this was far from Bret Hart's only great WrestleMania moment over the years. Hell, he's had plenty of them. And one of these is our next entry, in fact, the night he won the world title at WrestleMania 10. Of course, WrestleMania 10 was about more than just winning the world title for the Hitman, though, because this was the night he famously pulled double duty. And the way he did this was by starting things out going one-on-one with his brother Owen in a true mat classic. Why were the Hart siblings fighting here? Well, because in the months leading up to the show, dissension had started to drive a wedge between them as Owen became increasingly jealous of his older brother's success. So it was then that to open the show on March 20th, 1994, the two would battle it out, with the King of Hearts shocking everyone here by getting the clean win. But that wasn't the end of the night for Bret. No, as a result of him being the co-winner of the Royal Rumble with Lex Luger just 2 months earlier, when both men eliminated each other at the same time, he'd be the second man to face Yokozuna for the WWF title that evening. And unlike Lex, when the Excellence of Execution faced off against Yoko in the main event, he'd beat him, with this allowing him to start his second reign on top. That said, he couldn't celebrate too much because as he did, Owen appeared at the entranceway to remind everyone he had a win over his brother and so deserved the first shot at the belt. That's right, as one night stories go, this is pretty high on the list, and it fully solidified Bret Hart as the guy in WWF for the next couple of years. But he's not the only person who had to do double duty at WrestleMania and end the night as champion, because exactly 20 years later, the same thing would happen to Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 30. Yes, we all remember this one as it was such a ray of brilliance and a great underdog story. And no one better personified the underdog in 2013 and 2014 than Daniel Bryan, an overwhelming fan favorite and one of the greatest to ever lace up a pair of boots, who was trying everything to make it to the top, all while Vince McMahon was never a fan of smaller wrestlers his size.
Of course.
Obviously, though, fans didn't care about the American Dragon's size. No, all they cared about was the fact that he was their guy. And that's exactly why, for months prior to WrestleMania 30, they'd be drowning out shows with yes chants as they demanded the Aberdeen native get his shot at the gold. And all this would reach a breaking point when, at the 2014 Royal Rumble, Bryan wasn't even entered into the match, causing the live crowd to reject what they were seeing.
Which is the worst decision, to be honest. And what's worse is that Rey Mysterio was the 30 pick and he was getting booed. That's how it went down. It's how it is, man. Like, Vince doesn't like wrestlers who's growing organically based on the fans itself, because I think Vince prefer whoever he likes to become the next champion or the face of the company. He doesn't want to, decide what the fans wanted, and that's how it is. But it's really one of those things that this is one of his worst decisions, not putting Daniel Bryan at the Royal Rumble and making him win the match. So he decided to put on Batista, which is not a good way to return from Hollywood just to main event at WrestleMania against Randy Orton at the time.
What was the solution to this fan backlash? Well, it was obvious. Have Daniel win the WWE title at WrestleMania 30. But Vince McMahon continued to reject this at first, all until the fans changed his mind. That's right, after the backlash got too loud, at WrestleMania 30, Daniel Bryan would begin the evening by beating Triple H clean in the middle of the ring, with this booking him a spot in the main event for the WWE title, along with Randy Orton and Batista.
Against Evolution.
Where would he go from here? Well, in the main event of the evening, he'd beat both of the former Evolution members single-handedly to win the big one. And that meant fans finally got the moment they were hoping for, but didn't actually dare to believe would happen. All of this is to say, it was an all-time great moment, so much so that it's still talked about regularly to this day. But what of the flip side to the yes movement? The time Daniel Bryan played the heel to another underdog babyface trying to get their moment. Well, that would come a few years later at WrestleMania 35 when Kofi Mania ran wild. Yes, if WrestleMania 30 was the moment the American Dragon was the one everyone wanted to see win, then WrestleMania 35 was the moment everyone wanted to see him lose. And the reason for that was because this was the year he was standing on the other side of the ring from Kofi Kingston. Why had Kofi Kingston suddenly become everyone's favorite babyface in early 2019? Well, because after years of being locked away in the mid-card, he'd finally broken out after a star-making performance at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view. So because he broke out so much then, original plans to have Kevin Owens face Daniel Bryan for the WWE title were scrapped, and instead, Kofi was put in that spot, though not before he had to overcome a number of trials put in front of him by Vince McMahon. But once he did this, all with a little help from his New Day stablemates Big E and Xavier Woods, he was all ready to head into the biggest show of the year and realize his dream. The only question left then was, would he be able to do this, or would the threat of the American Dragon be too much to overcome? And that was answered at the midway point of the show. This was when, after an emotional battle which lasted for just under 24 minutes, Kingston would dethrone the champ. But let's move away from things that have happened in the last decade and go a bit further back in time.
Which is special between Kofi finally winning the WWE Championship after all those years. Of course, it's kind of a bit tortured because he has a lot of potential. He was part of many success of winning the Intercontinental Champion and then Tag Team Champions. But the fact that he never get a single World Champion during that time, the early Kofi, it's kind of a bit sad. But right now, he calls for himself now as a WWE Champion. Which to be honest, it's really bad because it kind of ended against Brock in 8 seconds, I think, and then we already know how he never gonna get a chance for a championship ever again. But that's how it is, That's how Vince make sure that once he's done, he's done. But right now he's doing the heel role, which is alright. But that moment for him to win, that was special, to be honest.
Way back to the 80s, in fact, as that's where we'll find our next entry. The time WWF packed out the Pontiac Silverdome for WrestleMania 3 with a classic main event pitting Hulk Hogan against Andre the Giant. That's right, if we're talking about iconic moments to take place at WrestleMania, then there are few that can stand on the same level as this. In many ways, this was the OG iconic moment the Showcase of the Immortals ever gave us. And that's because while WrestleMania 1 and 2 certainly had some big moments, it really was the showdown for the ages between the two biggest stars of the time that cemented this as the premier event in the wrestling calendar. What led up to it happening? Well, in the weeks and months prior to the show, Andre began acting a little more aggressively toward his friend Hogan, with this probably being a result of Bobby the Brain Heenan getting in his ear and convincing him he was the one who really should be champion. After all, he was the one who'd gone undefeated for so many years prior. So if anyone should be standing on top of the mountain, it should be the Frenchman. And that all led to Andre deciding to challenge the Hulkster for the gold on an episode of Piper's Pit, leaving the champ with little option but to accept and put his belt on the line in front of 78,000 people in Detroit. Of course, you all know what happened after that. The match delivered in terms of the spectacle people were expecting. And it all climaxed with Hogan delivering the body slam heard round the world, all before pinning the Giant for the 1, 2, 3. Even this many years on, you could make a strong argument that the Hogan-Andre showdown is the best moment in WrestleMania history. It certainly has to rank up there as one of the most important matches to ever happen on that show, and one of the biggest pop culture moments the industry has ever given us. But what about our next subject?
You may going to hate Hulk Hogan right now, but you can't deny that was one of the best WrestleMania moments that could be told for the next few generations and for years, because yes, it's true, because it really made it mainstream and to make it pop culture for the next foreseeable future. And that moment really, I could say, kind of significant to create that type of moment, what WrestleMania is all about. Not just top couple of matches, but there will be moments that's going to be made. And yes, the body slam to Andre was one of them. And this one, never thought we will see the day. Rock versus Cena. Well, basically twice in a lifetime, but right now they're working together, being the Hollywood Illuminati team, I guess, if that's what you call it. But right now we're going to know about this team.
The John Cena and The Rock series at WrestleMania 28 and 29. Of course, this one was never meant to be a two-match affair initially. No, originally it was supposed to be one and done. And the build for that one-time bout started as far back as WrestleMania 27. This was the show where, while making a long-awaited return as the special guest host of the event, Dwayne Johnson decided to screw Big Match John out of the victory during the main event between him and The Miz.
Which is effed up because The Miz and Cena was supposed to be the match, but it was heavily focused between Rock and Cena. So Miz was basically the third guy that, it kind of messed up, that he was just there. And then it's like he's just an afterthought between this type of event. But again, he did beat John Cena, retain his championship, but never got the last laugh because he got rock bombed by The Rock himself. So basically, this is just Dwayne The Rock's moment overall, I guess.
Needless to say then, Cena was not happy about this, and that was exactly why the next night on Raw, he challenged the Great One to a singles match at WrestleMania for the year following. As to how this match would go, well, great, and it would certainly deliver on getting fans interested. So interesting would they be, in fact, it would garner the most pay-per-view buys any WWE show had ever done with 1.1 million. And while most people assumed the ending here would be John getting the win as the torch was passed to him, in the end it would be Rocky who came out on top. Really though, there was a reason for this, with the reason being that at some point along the way, WWE had decided to make this a two-match series, with the second return bout happening a year after that again at WrestleMania 29. This time though, in order to bump up the stakes, the WWE title would be on the line, as The Rock would manage to beat CM Punk for that at the Royal Rumble only a couple of months before the show. And that made John Cena all the more determined to get the win by the time the bell rang, as he knew this was his chance to not only get his career back on track by beating the former face of the company, but also by regaining that gold he held so dear to him. And Cena would win here, and the torch would officially be passed, with this in many ways marking the end of the Cena era, as by the time WrestleManias 30 and 31 came around, it would be all about Daniel Bryan and Roman Reigns respectively. Not that they would be the only two people to headline WrestleMania in the years following, though. No, at WrestleMania 35, in fact, on the same night that Kofi Mania ran wild, history would be made in another way when, for the first time ever, the women main evented the biggest show of the year. Yes, for decades prior, women had always been treated like a lower card act, but come the mid-2010s, there was a change in the air, and that change was being led by 4 women: Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, and Bayley. Sure, not all 4 of these ladies would get to be part of such a historic moment as the first women's main event in WrestleMania history, but 2 of them would. And they wouldn't be the only ones involved either, as the third part of the equation would be former UFC bantamweight champion Ronda Rousey.
Supposedly it should be Ronda vs Becky, but adding Charlotte, I guess, but also the ending, it was really okay for Becky to win, but the ending was like okay, I guess, because I think Ronda's shoulders was a bit up and the ref didn't see it. But I guess if that's the end of the night, I guess, if that's what you're gonna call it. But overall, they got the right winner, but the match should have been Ronda vs Becky. You can't put Charlotte in it. I don't know why they put Charlotte though. I get that you have to put 2 belts on the line, but you know, it doesn't really make sense for Charlotte to be part of it. It doesn't need to, but what can you do?
Yes, the build to this one started when at Survivor Series 2018, the planned match between Ronda and Becky Lynch had to be called off when Becky suffered a concussion. So instead, it would be Charlotte Flair who took the man's spot, and that left the door open for the original bout everyone had really wanted to see to take place on the grandest stage of them all. Of course, by the time we got there, though, Charlotte would have also added herself to the mix, making the whole thing a 3-way, and this would mean that when things hit the ring that night, both the Raw and SmackDown women's titles would be on the line. Who won this one? Becky Lynch, of course. She was far too over in 2019 to not come out the victor, and that gave her an honor no one else could ever replicate, being the first woman to win a WrestleMania main event. Really, it was a hell of an achievement, and one the crowd were happy to see. But that's not the greatest achievement in WrestleMania history. No, if we want to find something even more historic, we have to look to our next entry, The Undertaker's WrestleMania undefeated streak. It started back at WrestleMania 7 way back in 1991. That was when The Undertaker made his WrestleMania debut against Superfly Jimmy Snuka. Obviously, then it wouldn't take long for the dead man to dispatch of his opponent that night, and that allowed him to move on to WrestleMania 8 1 year later, where he did the same thing with Jake the Snake Roberts. Where would he go from here? Giant Gonzalez, King Kong Bundy, Diesel, they all met the same fate. In fact, by the time we got to WrestleMania 18 in 2002, Mark Calloway had gone 10-0. And this was the point the WWE realized they had a thing as they started marketing the streak as an event, something in which every year someone new would step up to the Phenom in order to try to get the better of him. That said, no one ever would. No, whether it was Shawn Michaels, Randy Orton, Triple H, or anyone else, everyone always failed to beat The Undertaker at the biggest show of the year. And that led to things eventually reaching a staggering 21-0, a record which will never again be replicated. Ultimately, though, this was where things would end because in one of the biggest shockers in wrestling history, it would be at WrestleMania 30 that Brock Lesnar did what no one else thought was possible. He'd beat
The moment that Brock won, it really made me feel back then that I was so shocked. And I thought that it is impossible that there's someone tried to break Undertaker's streak. But at the same time, it was really not a good decision because you have a lot of options though. You could either give it to Bray Wyatt during WrestleMania 31, or maybe you can give it to Roman Reigns if he, is the guy during WrestleMania 33. But instead, you gave it to Brock. Does it meant anything to him? To be honest, he's already a made man. He already been one of those guys that is considered to be a legend in UFC. He's already been, decorated as this main eventer, you could at least give it to someone who deserves at the time. And I know that there are a lot of guys in the past, like Randy Orton. There were rumors that he's going to beat the streak, but he didn't allow it. Then there was Edge, but Edge declined. And there was other guys. But again, what can you do, right? You gave it to Brock because Vince said there was no one and no one's going to beat the streak. So he picked someone, even if it's already well decorated, to end it there. I believe that if you give it to Roman or Bray, that would benefit them. But, well, here we are.
The Undertaker, and put an end to the streak. Really, it can't be overstated how seismic of a moment this was for wrestling fans, as it truly meant the end of an era which had lasted for the entirety of some of their lives. But let's move away from decades-long arcs for now and onto a very specific moment from a very specific year for a second, the moment that Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels went 60 minutes at WrestleMania 12.
Yep.
Yes, one of the most famous WrestleMania events in history, as it featured a masterpiece of timing, pacing, and is the pinnacle of what each man was able to achieve as a wrestler. That's right, if you were a WWF fan back in 1996, you were watching this one as it was pitting the two best wrestlers in the company in the kind of match you'd be more likely to see in 80s Jim Crockett Promotions. What did this mean come the end then? Well, it would mean a sudden death overtime would be required. And It was during this overtime that HBK was able to hit 2 Sweet Chin musics in order to finally pick up the win. And for that reason, it's still talked about fondly by so many to this day, with many still considering it to be both Bret and Shawn's high watermark, even more so than Austin versus Bret from WrestleMania 13 or Undertaker versus Shawn from WrestleMania 25. But that's not the only time two guys hit the peak on the same night, as our next entry is all about the time.
The thing is that Bret and Shawn, they had their match, but they didn't pin or submit during the remaining 60 minutes. And then when the overtime came, that's when Shawn gets the win. So it's kind of a bit crazy that both of them did not accept any point of losing to a pinfall or submission. So that was really crazy for doing it in 1 hour. So now we're going for Cena and Batista fighting.
Both John Cena and Batista ascended to the mountaintop at WrestleMania 21.
Okay.
Yes, if you're a fan of the ruthless aggression era, then you'll remember that arguably the two biggest stars of that period were John Cena and Dave Batista. And that's why it's so interesting then to think about the fact that both these men would win their first world titles on the exact same night. How did they manage to do this? Well, it wasn't long after the first brand extension began, and so both Raw and SmackDown had their own top prizes, the World Heavyweight Championship and the WWE Championship respectively. Obviously then, this meant with John and Dave being on different shows, both were in the running for title success as WrestleMania 21 came around, with this being the period that Batista was engaged in one of the greatest storylines of the era as he broke away from his mentor Triple H and began to go after his World Heavyweight title. Meanwhile, as this was happening, over on SmackDown, Cena was rising up the card to the point that he'd become a top contender to the WWE title, then being held by JBL. Seriously, so high were these two rising, there was a question amongst fans about which one was going to be the face of the company going forward, and that question was the centerpiece of the ending to the 2005 Royal Rumble, the ending that saw this pair be the last two left remaining in the ring once 28 other men had been eliminated. But while Big Dave would win this one, it didn't mean John wasn't going to get his shot at JBL regardless. And that led us into the showcase of the Immortals where, in the middle of the show, Mr. Hustle's loyalty and respect was able to dethrone the heel champ. So now that he'd done this, the stage was set for Batista to do the same in the main event and confirm the idea that a new era had begun. And this was something he was able to do easily as it happened, because by the time WrestleMania 21 was over, he'd be standing tall over the game as the new World Heavyweight Champion. That's right, in one fell swoop, the Ruthless Aggression era stars had taken over, and this would fully usher in that new era for fans. But what of the prior era, the Attitude Era? There's yet another classic WrestleMania series associated with this, which we haven't talked about yet.
The trilogy.
So let's look at the trilogy of WrestleMania bouts between Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock. Really, there are few series which are more associated with the heights of WrestleMania than the Rock-Austin trilogy. Why is that? Well, because it's a trilogy which pitted the two biggest stars of the industry's history against one another in 3 separate main events over the space of 5 years. The first of which came at WrestleMania 15 in 1999. That was when Dwayne Johnson, then playing the role of Vince McMahon's corporate champion, put his WWF title on the line against the Rattlesnake and fell to him by the time all was said and done. But this wouldn't be the end of the battles between the pair. No, just 2 years later at WrestleMania 17, following Austin's return from a year-long absence post-neck surgery, the Giants would meet in the main event once more, and this time it would be a babyface versus babyface encounter. Not that it would be such by the time the match was finished though, because this was the one where, in order to beat incoming champ Rocky and regain his title, Steve Austin decided to go to the dark side by turning heel and aligning with Vince McMahon, pretty much killing the turn of the Millennium Boom period in the process.
Yeah.
But even if this ended the Boom period, it wouldn't be the end of the rivalry. No, 2 years later, the pair would meet for a third time at WrestleMania 19, and while this one wouldn't go on last, it would still technically be billed as a main event. Of course, in hindsight, it had to be a main event because, while we didn't know it at the time, it would be Stone Cold's retirement match. And that was why this was the one where he finally did the job for the Great One and put him over clean in the middle of the ring, as from there he rode off into the sunset. Which is the best of the three bouts? That all depends on who you ask. Whatever side you fall on, it's undeniably a series which represents the best of WrestleMania, just as every other entry we've looked at today does.
2 to me would be better for The Rock versus Stone Cold during that trilogy, because we never thought that one day or one time of that event that Stone Cold is about to turn heel, joining the dark side. But overall, this is a great, I would say, great list, or one of those greatest moments that, you know, Andy has to put for this video. But now that we're almost near to WrestleMania, we could see that, hoping that if John Cena might won the WWE Championship, to have one of those moments, or it could be something else. But overall, this is one of those moments that people are gonna remember for quite some time. Some may forget, but it's one of those things that it has something to prove. And all I can say is that this is a good video, so give it a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Also to Wrestle with Andy as well, give it a like, comment, subscribe to his channel. And all I can say is that thank you for watching, guys. We will see each other in the next video. Peace.